Hello, this is Dr. Adam J. Bach. In this brief audio presentation, we're going to talk about the idea of technology adoption or diffusion and how it relates to entrepreneurial activities. When we talk about technology adoption or diffusion, we're looking at the fact that when new ideas and innovations or technologies are made available, it takes time for people to begin to use them. And that leads us to a very specific question, which is, why are some innovations or technologies adopted faster than others? To look at this, we're going to examine the S-curve of technological diffusion, and then we're going to look at some of the drivers of adoption speed. When we talk about the S-curve of technology adoption, this is what we're talking about, and you've probably seen something like this before, where on the horizontal axis we're looking at time. So from the point that the innovation or the technology is first available to the days, months, weeks, years, decades after that. And then on the vertical axis we're looking at how quickly, how much of the market is using the new technology. And don't be confused by the scale, the percentages there. Those are additive amounts, right? So this scale runs from 0 to 100%, where this first group is innovators, and then the next 10% of people who adopt are early adopters, and so on. And so what we see in this chart is that adoption tends to start out slow and then ramps up very, very quickly as the technology or product becomes standardized. And then once most people have adopted it, it plateaus, it flattens out, and you have what are just the laggards, the people or the organizations that are kind of the last to the game who adopt a technology. And we can see this across a variety of technologies, whether it's going back as far as things like electricity or the telephone, things like the automobile, television. This is a slightly older chart, and so you can see over on the far left we have internet, cell phone, and PCs, but you can see the exact same thing happening. And cell phone market penetration, of course, is now effectively 100% for all practical purposes. But what's interesting is that if we were to look at some new technologies that are being adopted, things like machine learning or autonomous vehicles, we would find that we are in that very early stage, that very flat piece of the beginning of the curve in the first few years after the technology is launched. And what that strongly suggests is that when you look at something like autonomous vehicles, if you hear people saying things like, well, that's never going to happen, no one's ever going to use autonomous vehicles, they're never going to really take off, it's a very tricky thing to predict, right? Because all of the evidence shows that these types of innovations take a few years to really get to this point of a rapid diffusion or adoption, and betting against them can be a very, very bad idea. Another way of breaking out this process is by customer type, and you saw that a little bit in the S-curve. What this is doing is looking at it on a bell curve and saying that here is how the different groups spread out in terms of when they actually adopt a new technology. And so this curve is not cumulative. If you're mathematically oriented, the S-curve is the integral of this one, right? So that's the summation of this curve over time. So at the beginning, on the far left, we have the innovators, right? So there's this group of people who love to adopt new technologies. They'll try anything. They're not price sensitive. Something comes out, they have to have it. They're the first ones in line at the Apple store when the new iPhone comes out, right? Then you have early adopters. These are people who are not quite as zealous or fanatical as the innovators, but they're still enthusiastic and they're willing to try things because they're looking to get an advantage, whether that is an advantage in time or a competitive advantage against other companies, whatever it happens to be. And then you have the majority, the early and the late majority, and these are people and organizations who only adopt technologies or products when they've been pretty much proven. They know they work and they do what they're supposed to do and they have clear benefits that can be quantified. And then at the far right is the laggards. And this version of the S-curve, which was popularized by Jeffrey Moore in the Crossing the Chasm, which is a fantastic book. And if you're interested in entrepreneurship, it's one of the best books you can read in order to prepare yourself. he put this out there because he wanted to identify this concept of the chasm, the idea that there's this break between your innovators and early adopters and the rest of the market, the early majority and the late majority and the laggards. And the reason is because it's very easy as an entrepreneur to have an idea or a technology and to do some early marketing into the innovator early adopter group and have some success and think that because you've been able to sell this to early adopters or innovators that it's going to work for the rest of the market. And you fall into this chasm because the people to the right of the chasm do not make buying decisions the same way as the people to the left of the chasm do. The people on the left are willing to try new things. The people to the right only want proven products and technologies. And so if you market to them the same way you marketed to the innovators, it's very likely you'll fail. And the argument that Jeffrey Moore makes, which I think is completely accurate, is that many, many really exciting startup technology companies fail because they're unable to cross the chasm. The feedback they get from the innovators and the early adopters is so positive. It's so, this is going to work. We love it. We love the product. We love the technology, that they try to use the same thing to market to the rest of the market, which is the majority of the market, and they're unsuccessful, and then the company is unsuccessful. So some of the factors that do drive how quickly technologies are adopted are, does it have a relative advantage? Clearly it should be advantageous. But that's not enough. As we discovered in the innovation marketplace in class, on the first day of class, you realize that just being better is not good enough. It helps, but it's not enough. It also needs to be compatible with whatever technologies they're using right now. Remember, we discovered that if you bring something out that requires people to change their behavior, they're probably not going to do so. It helps if it's trialable. That is, can the customer try it and see if it works for them? Can they observe the benefits? If the benefits are completely intangible, then it's going to be a little tougher sell. Does the customer have to take on any risk? And does this make their life or their learning more complex? Those are negative factors that will slow how quickly a technology is adopted. But sometimes innovations have many unexpected uses. So here's an example that I want to point out to you, because how a technology is adopted is going to depend on what people adopt it for. So blank, perhaps you know the answer to this, is one of the most poisonous biological substances known. It's a neurotoxin. It's produced by a bacteria. Here's some details about it. So it's kind of this fascinating, deadly toxin that was discovered and developed over time. So how might it be used? Well, I guess it might be used for by spies for poisoning other spies or something like that. And it probably has all sorts of other unsavory uses that we could come up with. But that's not how this particular innovation became popular. Let me show you how this particular innovation became popular. This particular innovation is called botulinum toxin, but you probably know it by its more familiar name, Botox. And here is how, for example, that technology is being used in the market. This is an actual ad that I pulled off the internet, some kind of, I don't know if it was on Facebook or something like that, but here are some friends who are getting together. They bring over a doctor, and they're going to have botulinum toxin injections as part of their party. It's the centerpiece of their party experience to remove wrinkles and lines and such. And so sometimes technologies are used in ways that you might not expect. And the adoption of the technology will depend not so much about its underlying characteristics, but on how it's used. And that's one of the most important lessons of this course, is that it's not the technology, it's how the technology is used by customers that makes all the difference. And some technologies are adopted, but then rejected. And I'd encourage you to go to the presentation, click on the link, and read more about why Vine died. It once had a commanding lead over other social video apps, but it couldn't keep pace. Competitors were adding features, and ultimately the stars of Vine, the sort of influencers, the ones who were driving people to the site, left because they couldn't do the things that other social video platforms could provide. So I hope that this helps you understand a little bit about what technology adoption and diffusion is and some of the factors behind it, because this is going to be relevant to how innovations are adopted faster and how some companies grow more quickly. This can help you think about how the things you'd want to take into consideration if you decided to launch your own entrepreneurial venture. Realistically, how quickly will people begin to buy and adopt our new technology? One of the most important lessons after you've launched a venture and are thinking about entrepreneurial opportunities.